speakers and even discussants by the names Dr. Branwen Mumby. We have Mr. Ibrahima Khan, Ms. Benedicte Vuz, Mr. Chris Nash, Mr. Felix Lore, Ms. Jane Mary Ruhundwa. We have Ms. Josiana Uhiwinza and Ms. Johanna Katharina. Those are our speakers today and even the discussants. And without further ado, because we are 10 minutes late, we ought to have started at 11. I want to welcome Mr. Davis Malombe, who is the Executive Director of Kenya Human Rights Commission, to do a welcoming remarks so that you can know who KHRC are, what we do as an organization, and also give a brief background of our work on citizenship and statelessness. Welcome, Mr. Malombe.
Annette and the team members who have joined this webinar. My name is Davis Malombe. I work for Kenya Human Rights Commission. As we normally like saying, we are a premier non-government organization who has a big mandate of ensuring human rights governance at all levels, which means we deal with the major human rights issues from the local level, national level, regional and international levels. And for many years, we have been working around the marginalized communities and also the forced migrants, which include the stateless communities, the IDPs, among others. And for stateless communities, we have been very much interested in this agenda because this group is usually very exposed to so many human rights violations. Without identification, you are not able to access the socio-economic rights, political rights, among others. And we have had this experience in the work we have been doing in Kenya and also the region at large. And of course, in the region, statelessness has been a major problem within Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, South Sudan, among others, owing to historical and of course, post-colonial factors, which I'm sure are going to be part of the conversation today. And the region also hosts many stateless communities within the region. And there are also many others who are at the risk of statelessness. But one of the challenges we are struggling with also in the region is also lack of proper information about how many of these stateless communities are being hosted. And that could be also part of an agenda for another study to just establish the nature and the number of communities which are impacted by this phenomenon. The other major development is there's been major commitment also within the member states in the region to eradicate this situation of statelessness. But now the challenge is the progress has not been very consistent. In the context of Kenya, we have seen very good policy actions around the Makonde, the Shona, the Rwandese. In Uganda, we have seen the Maragoris, among others. But also in our analysis, the progress within the region is not very clear on where we stand. And it is on this basis, we have commissioned a study to just understand the status of statelessness in East Africa, and then what needs to be done to deal with this major governance and human rights issues. And in today's conversation, we are going to have distinguished scholars and practitioners to just take us through this conversation. So I take this opportunity to welcome all of us in this forum and also wish us very insightful and fruitful conversation. And I wish to promise you from where I sit, this is not going to be the end of this discussion. We are going to be having follow-up interventions within our countries where we are based and also within the East African mechanism to ensure that this issue is adequately addressed. So with those few remarks, allow me to welcome you again to this webinar. And also, let me also thank Ibrahima Kane and the entire OSF family for the great support they have been giving us, I think close now to 10 years around this agenda. And also UNHCR Kenyan office, they have been very, very supportive also around this issue. Kwa hayo, karibuni sana. Thank you so much, comrades.
Thank you so much, Malombe, for such a powerful introduction and also the firm commitment of KHRC on this work of statelessness and nationality, not just in Kenya, but also regionally. Without further ado, I want to take us to the next session, where we are now delving deeper into this discussion of status of statelessness in the EAC region. I want to welcome our first speaker, Dr. Branwen Mumby. He is one of the few leading authorities on nationality, law, and statelessness in Africa. He's written extensively on the right to nationality, comparative nationality law, and statelessness. He is a qualified solicitor. As a practitioner and persons with interest on this subject matter, you must have come across books, research papers, and even articles that have been written by Dr. Mumby. Among them, I would just want to mention the Citizenship in Africa, the Law of Belonging, Nationality and Statelessness Among Persons of West Africa, Identification in the Context of Forced Displacement, Citizenship and Statelessness in the East Africa Community, which was published in 2018. So the next 20 minutes, we will be able to understand nationality law, and he will also be able to highlight to us persistent legal gaps that contribute to statelessness in the East African region. Dr. Branwen, thank you so much for joining us this morning. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I hope you can see my screen. Yes, very good. So it's very good to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I was asked to give an outline of the citizenship laws in the East Africa community and the gaps that create risks of statelessness. So I'm afraid you're in for 20 minutes of legal detail. And I think, although my very final slide is going to be that statelessness it's not only about law, it's about practice. But since citizenship is created by law, it's the right to a nationality, the right to citizenship is different from other human rights in that you can see that you have the right to education or the right not to be tortured or the right to a fair trial. It has existence. You can understand the idea without the law, but the idea of citizenship, the idea of legal membership of a state, it's created by law. So there's somehow no escape from really getting into the legal details. So starting with just some history, because I mean, this is true in every continent in the world, but perhaps especially in Africa, that one has to look at where do today's states come from, since the legal definition is who belongs within the borders of the states as we find them today. And as is extremely well known to this audience, the borders as we find them in Africa today were imposed on the continent from outside and are difficult to accommodate in relation to pre-existing political institutions, pre-existing cultural families, and so forth. So one has to start from that. And therefore, the first rules that you have to look at around who is stateless today are: how did the law regulate the question of who lived in one of the colonial territories before independence, and how did they become citizens of the new independent states? For the former British territories, so Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda, all of which had different legal statuses as parts of the British Empire, but they had commonly negotiated constitutional provisions on citizenship, the famous Lancaster House constitutions. Lancaster House is a very fancy building in London, just next to Buckingham Palace. It's got a big staircase and gold framed portraits of dead white men and chandeliers, and it's a very, very grand house. And these constitutions were negotiated there, and they all had the same provisions. So if there were two generations born in the country, you automatically became, for example, Kenyan at independence. And other people born in the country or had a connection could register during a transitional period of a couple of years. Immediately after independence, the rule was, if you were born in the country, you were automatically a citizen, what is known as the law of jus soli in Latin, the right of the soil. Zanzibar had a particular status because of it was the ancient Sultanate of Oman, and it had its own nationality law dating back to 1911, but that's a separate question. Rwanda and Burundi, which had originally been German and then became Belgian, there were no rules on succession of state at all. The Belgians just left. And later they adopted descent-based laws modeled on the Belgian framework. Rwanda, 1 year after independence in '63. Burundi took 9 years to adopt a nationality law. So there's a gap there, little uncertainty about who was Burundian at that time, which can have consequences up till today. South Sudan, of course, became independent much more recently in 2011 and adopted a law that had very, very wide rules on attribution of citizenship. In fact, so wide that you create problems for those people of South Sudanese origin in Sudan, because Sudan says, well, you've become South Sudanese, but actually they don't really have any serious connection to South Sudan. And so these rules carry on having resonance till today. And we see, for example, the Makonde in Kenya, even the Nubians in Kenya, the Pemba, the Shona, these rules about succession of states as some of the reasons why those groups face difficulties till today. So what have been the trends since independence? The right based on birth in the territory, so if you were born in Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, you're automatically a citizen, have been removed in Uganda in 1967, but then brought back in 1995, but based on ethnicity. Kenya removed in 1985 with a retroactive effect. So everybody born in Kenya between 63 and 85 had that right taken away from them, although in fact it had not really been applied. And Rwanda, on the other hand, went the other direction, introduced some elements of rights based on birth in the territory. There was a big remodeling of Rwandan nationality law in 2021, so just last year, in which those rights were somewhat reduced, but nonetheless they retained. We've seen increased tolerance of dual nationality, which is in line with the trend across Africa and indeed across the world. And we've seen an increased, rapidly increased reduction in gender discrimination, not completely removed, but greatly reduced. And again, that's in line with trends in Africa and across the world. So what's the situation we have today? In relation to citizenship based on descent, known as jus sanguinis in Latin, equal rights from mother and father in all of the countries, except that in Burundi, the constitution and the law are in conflict with each other. So the constitution says they're equal rights, but the law provides for discrimination between men and women in transmission to children, and that can create problems in practice. Uganda has a glitch because if you are naturalized Ugandan, your children are not automatically Ugandan. And that, of course, can obviously create statelessness, especially if the person naturalizing had to renounce another nationality in order to become Ugandan. The children are then obviously stateless, and that's a big gap in the Ugandan law. We have 3 countries that have an explicit ethnic element to their citizenship law. So in Rwanda and South Sudan, there's a preference. So there's an enhanced access to nationality if you are Rwandan or if you are ethnically Rwandan, or in South Sudan, if you're a member of an indigenous community, is the word used. Uganda has a much stronger ethnic rule, and it's actually a restriction saying that you have to be a member of one of the listed ethnic groups in the constitution. However, just last week, there was a really important High Court judgment in Uganda confirming, in fact, an opinion that was issued 20, 30 years ago by the Attorney General, that people who had previously been citizens remain citizens. You couldn't take away citizenship. And so that's an important ruling. And so even those, in this case, it was about people of Somali heritage, many generations born in Uganda, who had difficulties showing that they were Ugandan. And the High Court said, no, these people are Ugandan because they are many generations in Uganda. And this ethnic group restriction cannot apply retrospectively. Uganda and South Sudan provide rights from grandparents, or in the case of South Sudan, even great-grandparents, which obviously enhances access to citizenship and reduces risks of statelessness. Tanzania has restrictions based if you are born outside the country. So if you have a parent who is Tanzanian, who was born in Tanzania, child born outside the country is Tanzanian, but if that child has another child, second generation born outside the country, that child is not Tanzanian. And that, of course, also creates risks of statelessness. I mean, the assumption being that they would have acquired the citizenship of the other country, but as we know, that may very well not have happened. And so that restriction also creates risks. Perhaps the most important protection against statelessness is where there is rights based on birth in the territory. Not necessarily absolute rights that you are automatically a citizen if you are born in the country, but at least some rights to acquire citizenship. Uganda provides this right if you are a member of one of the ethnic groups. Tanzania's law says the right exists, but in fact, it is absolutely clear that it is not applied, and the interpretation of the law is that it is descent-based, which itself creates lots of potential for confusion. South Sudan has rights if one great-grandparent was born in the territory. There's very, very broad rights, although in principle, you have to prove you're effectively an ethnic member of an ethnic minority group. Do I understand that you've only just been able to see my presentation? I just got a message to that effect, or did you see it before? Anyway, I'll continue.
I've seen it from the start, Branwen.
Okay, that's good. Zoom just sent me a message saying that participants can now see your presentations. I was a little confused. Rwanda provides some rights if you can apply for citizenship if you remain resident in the country until majority, but there are no rights at all in Burundi, Kenya, and in practice in Tanzania. And that means that even after multiple generations, you still have no rights to nationality or to citizenship, using the two words the same. And that obviously, we know in many African countries, there are communities who've been there for many generations, often since before independence. But if there are no rights based on birth in the territory, there are risks of statelessness. An important protection is children of unknown parents and place of birth, and those protections exist in Burundi, Kenya, South Sudan, and Uganda. In Rwanda, there's an application procedure which introduced in 21 rather than automatic right, but it's still there in practice. Only Rwanda has a protection to apply for citizenship if you would otherwise be stateless. And Tanzania has no protections of any type whatsoever. So Tanzania has the weakest protections against statelessness in this regard. An important question is adoption. If a child is being looked after by a family other than the birth family, if it's legally recognized, there's an application procedure in Burundi, Kenya, Rwanda, and Uganda, but there's no provision in either Tanzania or South Sudan. But also we know that there are many, many children being looked after by families who are not their birth families, and it is not legalized through formal adoption. And in the context of a region that has been affected by conflict in the past and until today in South Sudan, this question of children who are looked after by other families is really important in relation to statelessness. And it's in a gap, and the procedures about how one deals with that is really a gap. Especially, what do you do with the children who don't have a formalized legal adoption? Marriage, we have equal rights in Kenya, Rwanda, South Sudan, and Uganda. Men and women can equally transmit citizenship to their spouses. In Burundi and Tanzania, there's gender discrimination. Only a Tanzanian or Burundian man can transmit nationality to his wife, and a woman does not have the other rights. Generally, that does not create a risk of statelessness, providing the other spouse has an existing documented nationality, but it can do in the context of gender discrimination and administration of the law. And obviously, if somebody's been resident in the country for many years, they should have that right on equal terms. Naturalization exists in principle in all of the countries, with residence periods ranging from 7 years to 20 years from refugees in Uganda. In practice, however, naturalization is very inaccessible in practice. So the residence period is almost irrelevant if you have a lot of other conditions that you have to fulfill. Perhaps often the most important one for stateless persons is that a naturalization application saying, I would like to become a citizen based on long residence, very often you have to prove that that residence is legal residence, and you have to prove your existing nationality. And so, of course, for stateless people or indeed those who have no documents, you can't prove existing nationality, you can't prove legal residence. So naturalization, the difficulty of naturalizing also creates risks of statelessness. Dual nationality, again, you think, well, dual nationality, I mean, if somebody's got two nationalities, what's that got to do with statelessness? That they've got two nationalities. Why is that creating problems of statelessness, whether there is permission or not for dual nationality? Except that if we look in practice, who are the stateless populations in the world? Not just an African problem, same is true absolutely everywhere. is that the people who are at most risk of statelessness are the people who might have a claim in the view of the authorities of the country where they live to the nationality of another country. And those who are rich in that category have two nationalities. They'll get the passports for both. Those who are poor are at risk of statelessness. And it's an almost precise overlap. Is that, if you are born in America, so you have an American passport, and you've got one parent who's British and the other parent who's French, you'll have three passports. If you are, born in Kenya of one parent who's Tanzanian and the other one is South Sudanese, the chances are quite likely that you're stateless. If they're working in the informal economy and so forth. And so this question, so if dual nationality is allowed, in principle, it helps in this question of statelessness, because you don't have to prove that you don't have the other nationality to be able to get the nationality where you were born. Doesn't resolve all the problems, but it can be helpful. So finally, and this is my last slide, is that as UNHCR's Handbook on the Protection of Stateless Persons says, statelessness is a mixed question of fact and law. So all of these legal provisions that I've been looking at are, they are the foundation of what we're talking about. Can you argue that the law is different? But we know that in practice, depending on the country, a huge amount rests on questions like how many children's births are registered and how many adults births were registered in the 1970s. People who are now adults, do they have a, so it's not just the contemporary rate of birth registration, but the rate, can you prove that you have two generations born in the country in Kenya in 1963, which is going to depend on, whether the birth registration, and we know that that time, in the British colonies, for example, before independence, birth registration was compulsory only for Europeans, and Asiatics was the term used, not compulsory for people of African descent. And so birth registration was not there. So what can you prove is fantastically important. What are the types of discrimination that exist at local level in terms of the vetting procedures in Kenya, which say, bring a letter from your chief. No, the other chief, bring your parents, great-grandparents' documents, whatever, prove to me that you are who you say you are. And this, even if you are just simply renewing a document, at which point you say, well, you gave me a document last time, why must I prove it to you again? So these types of procedures are fantastically important, much less well researched, but really important in terms of how statelessness is created in practice. And one point to highlight is the introduction of the new biometric identification system, so the Huduma number in Kenya, but perhaps above all the new system in Uganda and Tanzania, where there have not historically been national identity cards. And these new systems are being rolled out with no reforms to the law. And effectively what is happening is that statelessness is being created by the fact that the new identity cards are being rolled out without reforms to the law and procedures to make sure that people are not excluded. So the new identification systems are really creating problems, I think, across the continent, in fact. They're also an opportunity to resolve some of these situations. I mean, I think we can look at it that way, in a positive way. Let's see if we can resolve some of the problems. But in practice, we see that there are problems being created. Costs can be a huge problem. I mean, even if an application for an identity card is free, there's all the getting photocopies, travel, all of those things, which is really important. And in many countries, the possibilities of appealing a refusal to give you a document are really high. You might have to get judicial review in the Anglophone system from the High Court, which requires a lawyer, requires court fees. It's really only accessible to somebody who's got support from an NGO or is independently wealthy. And in Tanzania, both the Immigration Act and the Citizenship Act say that the minister's decision is final, which means there is no appeal to the High Court. So even if you had that opportunity, the High Court would not be able to hear your case. So these questions of administration are also really important. And I will stop there. Here is the report on which this presentation has been based. And I can point you to the East Africa webpage on the Citizenship Rights Africa website, which I maintain with International Refugee Rights Initiative in Uganda, and provides lots of resources, and you can follow me on Twitter as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mumby. And indeed, statelessness is a mixed question of fact and law. And we have our discussant, Ms. Benedicte, who has wide-ranging experience on the nationality and statelessness subject, and has been advocating for enhancing refugee protection, particularly through fair and quality asylum procedures, and advancing comprehensive, durable solutions for refugees, mainly in West and Central Africa, as well as East Africa. So she has worked as a legal counselor for legal aid NGOs, supporting mainly asylum seekers, migrants, and refugees, including for complex asylum claims and humanitarian residency applications, among others. So she is our discussant, and will just be highlighting on the key takeaways from Dr. Mumby's presentation, and will also be able to give us her experience as regards this topic on nationality laws and persisting legal gaps as contributing to statelessness in East Africa. Welcome, Ms. Benedicte.
Thank you. So I'm trying to be very brief and just maybe summarize, in my view, what are the main takeaways from the discussion, from the presentation from Dr. Branwen Mumby. I think in terms of risk factor allowing statelessness in the region, I think we really need to retain that there is a real problem in this region regarding lack of adequate and complete safeguard to ensure that no child is born stateless, especially for children that are born in a country and without that safeguard, they would otherwise be stateless. The only exception we have is Rwanda, where there are complete safeguard, including for fondling and for children to not be stateless. I think it's important to retain that there are serious glitch in the Ugandan law, especially, for instance, for children born out of a Ugandan naturalized person, including the children born before, but more importantly, born after the naturalization process. So this can really create risk of statelessness for these children, especially that when you naturalize Ugandan, you have to renounce to your nationality of origin if you have one. I think we also need to know that in this region, what we face in Tanzania with the kind of difference between the word of the law and how the law is applied, it's obviously the fact that Tanzania apply a descent-based regime. So that means that there is no jus soli component. There is absolutely no protection for stateless children born on the territory to get the nationality status of Tanzania. I would say also of what we learned from Branwen presentation is also the really importance to mix some jus soli elements in the nationality law to make sure that there are those guarantees to avoid statelessness, and particularly I would like to take the example of Kenya, where we see recently there were about 50 people that were registered as Kenyan citizens, people of Indian descent that were born in Kenya. Most of them were young adults, a few were still children, but very few at the late, I think around 60 or even mostly 17. I mean, those people have been gone through a very heavy registration procedures in Kenya, which is actually a naturalization, and they have gone to that procedure that was discretionary long, and they have stayed for a long time without any nationality. If we would have had those legal safeguards in nationality law of Kenya, obviously those people would not have stayed stateless for so long. I think that's a demonstration that we could have found a much better and non-discretionary solution for those people. And my last word would be, I think what Branwen also highlighted in her presentation is really that statelessness is not only a legal question, but it's also a factual question. So beyond this legal analysis, there is really a need to look at the practice of states in terms of how you prove your descent or your parentage, how you prove your place of birth, how you prove your origin or nationality, what are the administrative practices, what are the practices that are put in place in some countries, such as the vetting, that may also create obstacle to effective access to the right to a nationality, and therefore are also a cause of statelessness. I think I will stay here in mindful of the time and the other speakers, unless there is any questions, comments, or at that stage. So I will hand it over to the panelists, the main panelists.
Okay, thank you so much, Benedicte, for that discussion. You've really highlighted the key takeaways, just dissecting that conversation that we had from our speaker, Dr. Mumby. And so I would want to bring to attention that we'll be having a Q&A session. We are hoping to do one more area, that one on civil society, the role of civil society organizations and communities in the eradication of statelessness in the EAC. And so I encourage the participants to communicate with us, to engage actively in this discussion through the Q&A session, which we will give these participants opportunity to ask questions to the panelists. But you can also write your question or comment on the Q&A section of this webinar. So I want us to move to this next question, where we are dissecting the role of civil society and communities in eradicating statelessness in the EAC. And I know most of the successes that have been gained in the region is as a result of collective collaboration between civil society and even the communities as well. And I've been asking myself a question, which I also want to throw to our participants and panelists. How many civil society organizations are in the EAC region working on matters statelessness and nationality? I've been asking myself that question, and because I know very well that this success or the achievement of eradication of statelessness is will also be majorly because of collaboration and partnership by different actors in the space. And so without further ado, I want to introduce to us the next speaker, Mr. Felix Lore, who will be talking to us about the role of civil society organizations and communities in eradicating statelessness in the region. He is the executive director of Haki Center. He is a dedicated human rights defender based in the coastal region of Kenya, with an experience of over 10 years working on citizenship and statelessness. Remarkably, under his leadership at Haki Center, he was involved in the successful advocacy for citizenship by the Makonde community in 2016. He is also currently working with the stateless Pemba community and Rwandese communities, and has so far achieved great milestones towards recognition of these communities as Kenyan citizens. I want you all to join me in welcoming Mr. Felix Lore to give us his presentation, and also just be able to dissect what are some of the strengths as civil societies that we have, what are the weaknesses, what are the threats, and what are the opportunities as a practitioner on the issue of statelessness and nationality in Kenya. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Annette, for the elaborate introduction. Once again, I'm Felix Lore, working for Haki Center, and we work with the stateless communities at the coastal region of Kenya. Just to start us off, I'll just talk about the stateless communities. We have a number of stateless communities in Kenya. The Makonde are stateless, and then we also have others who are still the Pemba persons of Rwanda and Burundi descent. We also have the Nyasa. And in addition, those ones are the people that we say are basically stateless communities. And then we have those who are at risk of being stateless, even though they are not stateless. These are the people that we say most of the times whenever they go to acquire nationality documents, they get a lot of they face a lot of challenges in acquiring the same. So that's the dynamics that we have. And one, I would like to note that statelessness is something that affects an individual as opposed to a group of people, because when you go to apply for a nationality document, you go as an individual, and the government will basically look at your application as an individual case. So that makes it a bit different, because whenever people go to apply, they are rejected individually. So that's basically the first challenge that comes with these particular people. So they first see themselves as individuals, then they realize that we have a number of people who face this particular challenge. Then they became as a community. So we started working with the Makonde community initially, because we were initially we did not even know that they were stateless, because we would be in a meeting and we talk together, and then they tell us we have no identification, we are not able to do 1, 2, 3. So we'll be able to share. They will be able to share with us their challenges, and then after that we were able to start then coming up with other people, teaming up together with different organizations to find our best way to solve their problems. And that is where we started working with different organizations, and that is coming into the where Annette has left it, as to do we have organizations working in East Africa working on stateless communities? Yes, there are a number of organizations which are working on stateless communities, even though I say we are like in Kenya, we have quite a good number at the local level and also at the national level. So what we've done basically is to build up synergy so that we have a caucus of NGOs. Currently, KHRC is involved, Haki Center is involved. We are having Namati. We are also having Nubian Rights Forum. We are having towards the Garissa, we are having Haki na Sheria, and we also have as much as in the northern eastern. So we are always working together to ensure that because with the nationality, we have taken approach where we say we have to be on the ground and be at the national level. There are advocacies that are done at the grassroots where the communities themselves have a role to play. And I'll give an example of the Makonde. When we were fighting for the Makonde to have to gain their nationality, they had a role to play, because we are saying the role of the civil society basically is to supplement. We are not taking the struggle for them, we are helping them in the struggle. So to help them in the struggle means we have to work together with them. So first we like what we did the approach of course building their capacity so that they are able to articulate their issues to the government, so that the government is able to understand them. And then after that, we are able to also to link them up with the media so that they are also able to talk out their issues. After that, again, we organize, like with the Makonde, we organize with them a walk from Nairobi from Kwale, basically where they live, most of them, to Nairobi to meet the president, so that they are able to articulate. That followed it. It wasn't a one-time event. It's an event that took a lot of time to plan, because we had done a number of letters to the government, and they were not bringing that. They were not taking any action. So we say, let's go and meet the president. So the Makonde team were like had to walk over it's a distance of like 600 kilometers. So we walked, and it was very successful because of the mobilization that we already did to the communities, and they were well prepared. We have also worked with the Pemba community again in doing other advocacy things, doing advocacy for them, where we have done petitions to the county government. In Kenya, we are having both county government and national government. So we have county assembly and national assembly. We started with the national county assembly because that's where the smallest unit of governance down. So we did a number of a petition to a number of county assemblies, including Mombasa, Kwale, and Kilifi, where we took a petition and it was discussed, and both the assemblies adopted the Pemba petition, and it was forwarded to the National Assembly, and the National Assembly also discussed the issue of the Pemba, and they also passed, and they unanimously agreed that a report was adopted that Pemba community should be one of the Kenyan communities. Up to that, we are still pushing with the ministry concerned so that they are able to also take in that take forward in the issue of the Pemba recognition. And also to highlight, I think our government through the work that we do with them have been very positive, because we have had the Shona community from Nairobi through the help of KHRC again and UNHCR coming up and stepping in to ensure that they are recognized, and they were recognized. So as a part of civil societies, we also work very closely with the UNHCR office, the Kenyan office, which we have also a caucus that brings us together. We call it statelessness working group that we meet every month. It brings all the civil societies working on statelessness, and also government departments, related government departments, including NRB, the National Registration Bureau, Department of Civil Registration, and Immigration Department, so that we are able to discuss challenges that we meet on the ground with the stateless community, so that they are able to understand what statelessness is. Because again, we know that it's a phenomenon, or it is rather a new thing that most of the times the government does not get well. So unless we have them in a discussion, is when they are able to do that. So we've been having UNHCR leading that particular caucus to us, and again, we also have just a caucus for civil societies, just for us also to discuss on issues that are affecting or issues of statelessness as a civil society, that we are able then to come up with challenges that we face, and also find ways that we can solve some of the challenges that we are facing, as of course as civil societies. Again, is that I know we always say that when it comes to issues of statelessness, it is still a new area, though not that much new, but we still have not quite a number of development partners or donors are into it. So most of the times, most of the funding that we do what we call, we need to coin statelessness into other programming, so that we are able to get the support. But because most of the times support, there are no outright partners who support purely stateless issues of statelessness. So that is basically one challenge. The other challenge is sometimes the government does not get to understand the stateless communities. What I mean by government not able to understand them is that again, stateless communities, like when you come to Kenya or Africa for that matter, nationality is defined by who you are. When we say nationality is defined by who you are, like in Kenya, it is about the communities. So, and these people might have originated from somewhere else. So the officers or the people concerned would feel like if I give an example of the Makonde, they originated from Mozambique. If you give an example of Pemba, they are originating from Tanzania. So every stateless community is perceived to have come from somewhere, and then this particular somewhere, they are not recognized as citizens of that somewhere. And now they are in a new territory. The current government does not recognize them here. They say they are coming from somewhere else. So that's a puzzle that is always a challenge for the government to understand that these people have been there. So when you put them the tag and say, like for instance, the tag that we used to get for Makonde is they are from Mozambique, and the Mozambican government were also not recognizing them. So anytime we front that issue, we'll be told, no, these are Mozambicans, they just need to get back to Mozambique. And we are not talking about the first generation here or the second or the third. In most cases, they were on the fourth generation. And the fourth generation, these are people who were born purely in Kenya. They know nowhere apart from Kenya. They know nowhere apart from Kwale. So even if you are to take them and drop them in Mozambique, even where they start from would be a very big challenge. For communities which are not purely stateless but are perceived to be stateless, one of the challenge is again when they apply for documents, they receive what we are calling waiting cards. Basically, the nationality, identification card, which is very prominent in Kenya. You should be, the waiting card is when you do an application, you are given a card to wait. Should be around 3 months, but we have people who are waiting for over years. They have never received identification cards for over years. So they have kept on waiting until it is no longer a waiting card. So we also help these particular communities by ensuring that we follow up on their cases. We have what is called a database that, of course, we use Salesforce, and we are using what is called community paralegal work, where from the communities that are getting challenges in applying for nationality documents, will of course have paralegals based within their communities who are then able to take them through the process of application, help them in the applications, and also follow up with their case. So we have a database that is able to capture, for instance, if it is a birth certificate, from the time when the birth certificate was applied until when it is received. That's one. Number two, when it comes to identification card, we have a database also to show when this person first applied and when he got the card. So we are able even to question the government. Like we have a case in Malindi where it was taking a lot of time. We realized that a normal birth certificate should take 1 week, but in this case, birth certificates were taking like 1 month. So when we had a meeting with the UNHCR caucus, with the government, we were able to post this question like an advocacy, just to get to know why it was taking that longer. And the answer, we were given an answer at that point that there were no certificates that not been printed because they are centrally printed at the government printers. So we were then able to go back again and tell the communities that no, it is not a big problem. It is that the certificates are not yet printed and they'll be printed. So that's just a good example of how, again, collaboration helps in bringing collaboration helps in advocacy to that particular event. So we are also able to organize for what we call the mobile birth registration exercises, where we move the officers, we support the officers of the registration officers to move from the office where they are to meet the people on the ground. They then move, they literally move their officers to areas which are very far from them. Like the birth registration has, we have few registration offices where they work from. So people have to move very long distance to go and have their birth registered. So when we do what is called mobile birth drives, then we are able to have as many people to getting the nationality document as required. Some of the lessons that, of course, we've learned all along with working with the stateless communities, one of them is that it is not an easy job. And again, we realized that some of these communities would mistake us for being the government. Because for a long time, there are people who have been looking to be registered and they have not been registered. So when you come to support them, they would think that now help has come and you are going to register them. while the work of registration is not yours, is for the government. So we need always to tell them in advance that we are just coming to support you here, work together with you, but not to register you. We'll just help you voice your grievances so that the relevant authorities will be able to get to know you. We've had cases where communities give up on the way because they have waited for so long. For instance, the case of Makonde, God forbid, even others had to leave because others passed on before they could see that particular day, because it was a long struggle all along. We've also, the Makonde case has helped us a lot, not only as an organization, but as a caucus, in being like a case study in dealing with the statelessness issues in Kenya in general. We used the Makonde case study as a lessons that we learned there, even to be applied to the Shona community when they were being recognized. Again, we have also used other lessons that we learned from the Shona, things like having a community register, which we were not having in the Makonde. We brought the same to now the Pemba community, that we now have a clear register for the Pemba community. So those are basically some of the lessons that once we pick it from, we have a process, we are able to pick the lessons from one process, building into the other process altogether. I think I'll be able to stop at that point and to give a chance to others as well.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lore, for the fascinating insights on the role of civil society in eradicating statelessness in Kenya, because I know you've given a Kenyan experience, and also it is interesting to know the interlocutor position or role that the civil society in Kenya also play in terms of bridging that gap between the government and the citizens in as far as this struggle to eradicate statelessness is concerned. We will quickly move to Ms. Jane Mary Ruhundwa, who is the co-founder and the current executive director of Dignity Kwanza in Tanzania. She has 15 years of experience in refugee rights, nationality rights, and migration. And also prior to founding Dignity Kwanza, she served as the country director of Asylum Access Tanzania and as an assistant lecturer at Tumaini University. So she's currently the co-founder and chair of the Tanzania Refugee and Migration Network. And so she will just be also sharing the Tanzania experience, just as Mr. Lore has done. She will also be able to give us some of the successes, achievements, and even challenges that civil society face as they undertake their day-to-day work of pushing or advancing this agenda of eradicating statelessness in the EAC region. Karibu sana.
Thank you so much, Annette. Good morning. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you so much. And thank you. So I will share the experience in Tanzania, but I'll also be using some few points that I picked from Mr. Lore's presentation. I totally agree. First, the statelessness situation is an individual situation, although it's affecting communities. We're facing the same in Tanzania. When it comes to civil society engagement and support in Tanzania, the first question, whether do we have active civil society engagement in the statelessness issues, the answer is for us in Tanzania, it's still a work in progress. We are not as advanced as our brothers and sisters in Kenya are. And the first reason is the fact that was already mentioned that the statelessness is a new phenomenon, even in Tanzania. And another reason is the fact that we haven't had national IDs for years. We have just started rolling out in the past few years. And hence, people have been living, believing that they are Tanzanians. And now, when they have to apply for national IDs, they realize that according to the law, they may not be Tanzanian. So that is the issue is coming up now. So until now, it has been mainly UNHCR, and when it comes to CSOs, we may say it's, we can confidently say that it's only Dignity Kwanza that is in this. And one of the objectives that we have is to bring in more civil society. Because again, Mr. Lore mentioned that advocating for the eradication or also for recognition of these communities and finding solutions for them requires concerted efforts of many actors. So UNHCR, government, and Dignity Kwanza cannot do that alone. We have seen, even though Mr. Lore's organization started with the Makonde community, along the way they kept on teaming up with other organizations like KHRC and others, and that led to success. So in terms of civil society engagement in Tanzania, we're still work in progress, as I say. Luckily, we're working fairly closely with UNHCR, and the government is also slowly coming up still. At least we have the national focal person for statelessness, and that's a positive first step. At least there's a person that can be engaged with. But in terms, if I go now, no matter how few we are, what Dignity Kwanza is doing. So Dignity Kwanza, we're engaging with communities and individuals as well. So we have started, we're working with the Makonde communities, a community in Zanzibar, supporting them to, empowering them to be able to address, to push forward the agenda. There are some progress made in the government to recognize them as a community, but again, the applications have to be done by individual people. People are still in denial. They don't accept the fact that after so many years, after their parents being involved even in the revolution for Zanzibar, for example, that they are told that they are not Tanzanian. So we're also trying to raise awareness, make them understand why they are told that they are not Tanzanians and what they should be able to do. But that's not enough, because applying alone is one process, but there's a fee to be paid. The government has generously reduced the fee, but it's still a lot. It's 2 million Tanzanian shillings, which is about $800 US dollars. Majority of the community, especially the Makonde community members in the Makonde community, are not able to come up with that amount. So then that calls for advocacy with the government to see whether it's possible, there's a possibility to waive the fee altogether. But for other communities that majority of their members have been able to apply, we keep on engaging them to also empower other community members that are not have not been able to naturalize, or to apply for naturalization. But at government level, we're also engaging with the government and UNHCR. We're working with UNHCR to try to advocate for the adoption of the two statelessness conventions. We participated in creating the National Action Plan, and we continue with capacity building for community members, but also government officials, to raise awareness about the statelessness issue. As a legal aid provider, we also provide legal assistance through the process for those people who are facing challenges in applying for the national identities, or for facing challenges in registering their children's birth. We have been providing legal assistance to the people who realized that they are not legally Tanzanians, and they have to follow the processes to be recognized as Tanzanians. So we continue to also provide legal aid and support to individuals who need those kinds of support. There's a lot for us as civil society to learn from Kenya and possibly Uganda in terms of how their movement has developed to the level of them sharing the successes that they have. The challenges remain to be similar. The added one for us is the fact that we are few, or the only ones here. But the issue of specific donors focusing on statelessness is also the same here. The government's understanding of the statelessness issue in general is the same here. As I mentioned before, it's still new. And there is always that question of, we can't say these people are stateless. We know they came from Rwanda, so they should go back to Rwanda. And they are not at the point of looking at what that means and what the process looks like. So that's why capacity building continues to be important. And in terms of successes that we can talk about, we have, as I was saying, we have a community that is now more aware. As I mentioned, the Makonde community.
We seem to have lost Jane Mary. We can give her like a minute to see whether she can be able to get back. If not, we can proceed. Jane Mary, can you hear us? Okay, we can move on. We will get hold of her and just see whether she was through and whether there's any addition she would want to provide or add to whatever she had already submitted. So we'll move quickly to Rwanda now. We have Josiane Uwineza. Yes, so Josiane has 4 years of experience working with the UNHCR in Rwanda. And particularly what stands out is her experience at the Emergency Transit Mechanism Center, established to provide protection pending solutions to persons of concerns that have been evacuated from Libya to Rwanda. So really addressing these issues. And I know she is stepping in for Johanna Katharina, who was to be our speaker, but due to unavoidable circumstances is not with us, but would be joining us later. So she will also be speaking on the experiences they have on the matters statelessness and nationality in Rwanda. Welcome, Wineza. You have 10 minutes to share with us your experience.
All right, thank you very much, and thank you for welcoming us on this platform. Maybe just also to slightly add that besides our main refugee setting, which is the place for the evacuees, we also are established in the eastern province of Rwanda, close to the border with Burundi. And in our work with working with urban refugees and urban persons of concern to UNHCR, we've worked closely, and we've received some people with statelessness related issues. And I also worked with my colleague who was not able to join today, Johanna, on some of the outreach projects that happened with government officials in what is called the Statelessness Task Force. So I'll quickly go through the experience of Rwanda. So basically, in general, the persons that are affected with statelessness issues, persons without any identification, persons with undetermined nationalities that exist in Rwanda are assistant. They come from, for example, different avenues. They are not like categorized like as ethnic groups as many other situations in other countries. But for them, you will see that it mainly comes from where they were, where they came from. If, for example, their ancestors can not be traced in Rwanda, but also reasons that come from protracted refugee situations that also took place in this region. So quickly, to tell you about what has happened in Rwanda, as I said earlier. So Rwanda has made 8 pledges at the high level segment on statelessness. And besides that, and from 2019 backwards, there was very little action on this issue of statelessness, except again the signing of both conventions in 2006. But the pledges made, as well as the establishment of the National Statelessness Task Force in 2020, which is one of the pledges that Rwanda made, this has really kickstarted good action towards resolving the issue of statelessness in Rwanda. So currently, the Rwandan government, through the National Statelessness Task Force, is organizing a nationwide identification survey. And the previous pilot of that survey has shown that the local authorities are able to identify the target people, the people of interest for this identification. Also, as we talk now, around more than 1,000 government officials on the district and sector level have been trained on statelessness in these 4 weeks. And also, as I said, different actions have been taken in different districts. Currently, as we talk, colleagues through that National Statelessness Task Force, where also UNHCR is involved, they have gone through these different places in Rwanda to train the people and to set the ground so that this data collection event can happen. This data collection event is really a very key point, because it will enable to establish the exact number and the exact persons affected, so that the right actions can be taken to resolve those issues. But generally, the knowledge of the government officials, the recognition of who these people are, and also the trust that these communities have in them, as well as the newly revised nationality law, the law that was the 2021 nationality law. These 2 big actions are really laying the way so that the issues of people without nationalities and statelessness people can be resolved in Rwanda. Only really where the focus is probably going to be on the procedural processes and the administrative requirements. But Rwanda looks like it's really setting the ground for appropriate action to resolve the issue of statelessness. Quickly now on UNHCR and civil society, as mentioned in Rwanda, from the pledges of the high-level statement in 2019, before that, there were really little awareness on these issues. And that's why you will see that civil society members are not really very much involved. But currently, with the training of people that are involved in the survey, and also a planned rollout of radio and TV awareness campaigns, all of this is expected to even put the awareness higher and maybe also mobilize other actors to come and contribute. But quickly now, within the few minutes that I have left, we can say that I can just give you a quick overview of what the people, stateless people in Rwanda, the stateless populations in Rwanda, the map, so that we can understand. Some come from, for example, from refugees in protracted situations and their descendants due to long exile in Rwanda, and who lost ties with their countries of origin. That's, for example, Burundians who came in Rwanda in 1972 and who have stayed and who lost their documents, who are no longer, do not have any proof to prove their status, their refugee status, and do not, and they lost the ties with their country of origin. We also have people in urban regions and in border regions and also in urban centers who reside in Rwanda and lost the ties with their country of origin and are not able to prove their citizenship in the country of origin. We have some people, like as I said, in this eastern province where I'm currently sitting, close to the border with Burundi, but also people close to the border with Tanzania or people of Omani descent that are living in Kigali and other urban places. We also have undocumented returnees who identified themselves as Rwanda. As you know, in 1994, there was a genocide that happened in Rwanda, and that it caused a lot of people to flee. And as these people start returning, some of them are able to trace where they come from and their family ties, but some lost all the ties. They don't know how to identify themselves, and when they're in the process of getting their documents, they are not able to identify their relatives, and such procedural issues actually affect them, and they're not able to prove their citizenship. We also have, for example, children that were raised in foster care or child care, but without officializing their adoption, for example. And they grow up, but they are not able to legally prove their citizenship. We also have former Rwandan refugees whose refugee status has ceased, and they stayed in their country of asylum without access to a documentary proof of their nationality. So this is the map of the people that are affected in Rwanda. And as I said, it looks like there is a very clear pathway to the resolution of those cases. So I think I hit my 10 minutes. But basically, maybe just to close, the main challenges that this group face with the increased digitalization of like civil systems and even social and economic systems in Rwanda, these people are not able to access, for example, the health insurance, the public health insurance scheme that all the other Rwandans are able to have, because that requires a national ID, for example. Also, in Rwanda, there is four economic categories established. They are called Ubudehe, and depending on which category you are, you benefit from social assistance programs from the government. These people cannot access this because, again, it requires to have a national ID. Freedom of movement also, of course, is another big problem, because they don't have any documents. They cannot be issued any passports or anything like that. So this in some of the issues, also the fact that they are not able to have bank accounts, this prevents them from even having a job because they need to have documents to be paid on. This is the different types of challenges that these people have been living in, but even despite that, they have lived in those situations, and even some parents have, especially like those that we met, but they've been very resilient, and they are also supported by the community. The communities close to them really feel for them and try to help them, but of course, only a pathway to get the proper documentation and nationalities will allow them to enjoy the school rights and the school services as well. So I'd like to go there, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Josiane, for such a powerful presentation on the Rwanda's experience. And in the interest of time, I'll really not be able to highlight some of the takeaways from your presentation. So I will quickly move us to the next speaker. We will be talking about the regional and international best practices on eradication of statelessness and network building. And the next speaker, Mr. Chris Nash, has been in the field of migration for over 22 years. He is the director and co-founder of the European Network on Statelessness. So this network is a civil society alliance of over 170 non-governmental organizations and even experts covering 41 countries and committed to addressing statelessness in Europe. So he has previously worked as asylum lawyer. He's worked with the European Council on Refugees, the Refugee Council of Australia, and Amnesty International, and also Asylum Aid. He has written widely on asylum, migration, and statelessness policy. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Chris Nash to speak to us on the regional and international best practices on eradication of statelessness and network building, because indeed he has this experience. Welcome so much.
Thank you, Annette, and good morning, everyone, and many thanks to the Kenyan Human Rights Commission for the invitation to speak today. ENS was the first ever regional statelessness network to set up, so we're always happy to share our learning, but equally to learn from other regions about the great work that's being done across the globe. As you mentioned, I am a lawyer, but unlike Branwen, or at least my legal brain is much smaller than Branwen's, and what I do know about the law is primarily based in Europe. So I'm not going to talk to you much about the law, and I'm going to focus more on network building and related good practices. I also don't have a long PowerPoint, partly because I've been quite busy recently, or we've been quite busy with the Ukraine crisis, but also because I would prefer to keep my presentation quite conversational in style. So I actually thought I would use the very helpful sort of guiding questions given to me by the organizers to sort of structure my presentation. And before I start, just for those who are not familiar, the European Network on Statelessness, my organization, is a civil society alliance with 170 members, including 100 NGO members covering 41 countries in Europe, dedicated to addressing statelessness through a combination of law and policy, capacity building, and awareness raising activities. We have a staff team of 8 in London who coordinate the work of the network. So the first question I was asked to think about was to tell a little bit about how ENS was established. And actually, ENS was born as an idea back in 2011 when I was having a coffee with a colleague in Hungary. And we decided that there was a gap, that no umbrella organizations coordinating work by NGOs and community organizations across Europe. So what we did was we sort of gathered together, I mean, probably the handful, the 5 or 6 NGOs and academics working on the issue at that time. So people like Laura Van Vaas, Amelda Chikara, Gabor Gulai, Sebastian Cohn from Open Society. We gathered together in London for a meeting in June 2011. 2011. And it was one of those meetings where within half an hour, we decided that we needed a network, we thought of a name, we had a bit of seed funding from OSJI to set up a website and to provide a little bit of funding to enable the steering committee to meet periodically. And for the for the initial period, ENS was run by the steering committee of its initial founding members. And then we launched publicly in 2012. And when we launched our website, and at that point we were able to grow the membership, to attract new members, to put out reports, and to increase our profile sufficiently to be able to attract enough funding to incorporate as an independent organization, with our own legal identity as a charity in the UK. So this would take us to the second stage of ENS's development, which was in September 2014, when we incorporated as a charity in the UK. And we developed a first 5-year multi-annual strategy to guide our development, which covered the period 2014 to 2018. And I won't describe that strategy in much detail, but I would highlight there may be 3 features in particular. Firstly, we saw an opportunity and a strategic advantage in focusing on nexus areas for statelessness. So, for example, the nexus with child rights, addressing childhood statelessness, or a second nexus was anti-discrimination, particularly looking at the discrimination faced by Roma stateless communities in Europe. Thirdly, the nexus with forced migration. So, including establishing stateless determination procedures for stateless people in a migratory context. And fourthly, rule of law type issues around preventing arbitrary detention. And in that initial period, we launched several sort of projects and awareness raising campaigns linked to those nexus areas. So a bit later, I'll say a little bit more about our Stateless Kids campaign, addressing childhood statelessness. But in this period, we also did campaigns to try and prevent the arbitrary detention of stateless people. That was our Locked in Limbo campaign. We did a project addressing Roma statelessness through our Roma Belong project. And we also had another protection campaign trying to encourage more European countries to establish stateless determination procedures. And then the other sort of main focus of our first 5-year plan was recognizing there was quite limited awareness of statelessness and the lack of knowledge and capacity. We did a lot of training and capacity building work, including, for example, designing the first ever Train the Trainer event on statelessness, so we could train up our members to in turn go back to their country contexts and train stakeholders there to have a sort of cascading effect in terms of spreading knowledge. And then the final thing I'll mention about this period was towards the end of it, we established our Statelessness Index, which if you're not familiar with, I can share a link in the chat later. But this is, I think, the first, well, it's an online tool which enables a comparison of law, policy and practice, now covering 30 European countries. We developed the index in partnership with our members in those countries, and we assess countries' law and policy against international norms and good practice. So in this way, we're sort of able to score how well they are doing. And it's a really invaluable tool to support all our work. And it's obviously also very organic and can be constantly updated. And then if I can move to our third phase of development, so our current 5-year strategy, which runs from 2019 to 2023, I guess the first thing to emphasize is that we've doubled our staff team. So we now have 9 working in London. We've also developed particular projects, for example, our Stateless Journeys initiative, so we can delve deeper into understanding and addressing the particular protection needs of stateless people in a refugee context. And Ukraine is a good current example of where that's relevant. We've also, during this period, significantly tried to strengthen our legal advocacy and our strategic litigation. And last July, we published the first dedicated case law database on statelessness and nationality, our statelessness case law database, which we launched in July. And this contains not only jurisprudence from regional courts, such as the European Court of Human Rights, the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg, as well as international courts. It also includes case summaries of jurisprudence from national level, which is, I think quite a new innovation. And then finally, and certainly not least, a key objective of our strategic plan was to make sure that stateless people inform and deliver our mission. And in this regard, we're really pleased that, we've had many new members join our network who are either stateless or directly represent affected communities. And we've got a whole program of engagement and a strategy with them. And I think it really strengthens sort of our effectiveness as well as our legitimacy as a network. So that was the response to the first question of, how was ENS set up? The second question I was asked to think about was, what would you say forms the core strength of the network? And here, what I would say is that we are very much only as strong as our members. I really believe that very strongly. And, maybe I'd pick out 3 ways in which we've tried to recognize that. So firstly, we've always at ENS had a philosophy of trying to channel funding and resources through our members where possible. So for example, I mentioned our Locked in Limbo campaign, but it would be the same for other projects. We would typically try to subgrant to members to effectively give them funding to be able to do research at country level, and to produce a report, to organize some capacity building events, with the hope that through this engagement, they would then be motivated to continue to advocate for actual law and policy reform off the back of the research. And that's a model we've used for several projects. And for example, for our Statelessness Index, which I mentioned a moment ago, we pay our members a retainer fee to update the index content each year, because it does often involve a fair bit of work, and obviously they are the experts at country level, and then in the centre at the Secretariat we just help to coordinate and synthesize and check that information and make sure it's accessibly presentable on the website. So that would be the first thing, channeling resources for our members. The second point I would emphasize in terms of what forms a core strength is again, the comparative research. So not only our Statelessness Index, but also our case law database, because the index gives us a tool by which we can benchmark progress or lack of progress in Europe, by governments to improve their laws. So, we can look at the index to see where the gaps are in law, policy and practice, and we can focus our advocacy accordingly. Or, where there are good practices, they can be shared to other countries. And as a tool, it also enables stateless people themselves to learn more about law, policy and practice in the countries in which they are living. And then thirdly, in terms of a core strength, again, to come back to the point about the engagement of stateless people and directly affected communities, it's really important for us that, stateless people are at the centre of what we do, that they both inform and help deliver our mission. And, we're very keen to try and work with them to challenge power imbalances. Excuse me. So the third question I was asked to answer is, what are some of the best practices on eradication of statelessness that EAC can learn from the international or regional level? Now, this is I think a tricky one to do in the time I have available, because obviously every region is different, and listening to Branwen and the other speakers, clearly there are different issues in Africa, and it would need more thought as to what good practices might be useful to be aware of. I mean, there are equally, Europe is not full of good practices. Things have been a little bit static for a while, but maybe one good practice innovated in some countries, including in the Western Balkans, is the facility to enable late birth registration, where historically that has caused intergenerational statelessness by people without birth certificates being unable to pass on nationality to their children. I was interested to hear Branwen talk about some of the challenges on naturalization in Africa. If you look at our Statelessness Index, there's not much good practice on naturalization in Europe either. So rather than dwell on this, I would just you direct people to our statelessness index, and you can find good as well as bad practices there, hopefully in an accessible way. But what I did want to do is to, I would hesitate to call it a good practice, but I wanted to say a little bit about our Stateless Kids campaign, just as a possible model to try and achieve, law and policy reform in a regional context. And I think Robert had kindly agreed, or someone had kindly agreed, to screen a very short animation about our Stateless Kids campaign, which will give you the gist of that campaign, and then I can say a few further words. If that's possible, that would be great. If not, no worries. Thank you.
Nationality. I think it means being part of a country. Most kids don't know how they got theirs or what it would be like if they didn't have one. But there are thousands of kids in Europe who grow up without nationality, without a country to belong to. They are often not allowed into schools or even to see a doctor if they're sick. No chance to grow up like other kids. Life is hard and there's nothing their parents can do to help them. These kids are called stateless. Andrea is 9. She was never allowed to go to school, so she stayed at home looking after her younger sister. She never knew why the government wouldn't let her go to school like her friends. Maria's mum didn't have any proper papers, like a passport. Without it, the ambulance wouldn't take her to the hospital to have a baby. She gave birth at home. Maria still doesn't have a birth certificate. Eric was left alone by his mother soon after he was born. He is now 16, but still can't get any proper papers. Without them, he can't prove who he is, so he isn't allowed to do his training to be a baker. Like Andrea and Maria, he has no future. There's lots of different reasons why children end up stateless, but it's never their fault. More than half of the countries in Europe are failing to fix the problem. The European Network on Statelessness is asking these governments to make simple changes to their laws so no child is forced to grow up without nationality. Please join our campaign to help us end statelessness forever.
Thanks for sharing that. And as was said in the film, no child chooses to be stateless, and it's never their fault. And yet, in Europe, more than half of countries do not have nationality laws that meet their obligations to grant nationality to children born on their territory who would otherwise be stateless. And we were, at ENS, we were conscious that this was resulting in thousands of children growing up stateless across Europe. And as a network, we sort of felt this was thoroughly preventable. And this is why we launched the Stateless Kids campaign. So, having first built a broad coalition of supporters and an evidence base, also for a research report, No Child Should Be Stateless, we then designed a public-facing program of activities under the Stateless Kids campaign banner, including a youth congress to stimulate country-level work, a petition, an online awareness-raising campaign, and fourthly, some targeted regional advocacy actions. And I'll just quickly run through each of those and what they entailed. So our Stateless Kids online petition was launched in June 2015, and we used the campaigning website wemove.eu. We also translated the petition text in terms of the changes we wanted to see into 9 languages. And the petition eventually received over 22,000 signatures, which significantly exceeded our expectations, and that was in a 6-month period. And the ways we tried to drive sign up was that we organized a number of campaign emails, and we used the animation you've just seen to encourage people to sign the petition, as well as other infographics and testimonies from children affected. The second, component of the campaign was that we set up a Stateless Kids campaign microsite, and this hosted various campaign resources and materials. And we deliberately tried to make sure that these materials were compatible with social media. So as well as the campaign video, we had infographics on what does it mean to be stateless, why do children become stateless, birth registration and statelessness. And these were used in the series of awareness-raising emails, which I mentioned, which eventually went to a list of over 10,000 campaign supporters. Then the third component was, I think, also quite innovative, was our engagement with youth ambassadors. So in order to broaden the group of volunteer supporters working at the national level, we designed a program to engage young European activists and to equip them with the skills necessary to become youth ambassadors supporting the statelessness campaign in their own countries. And the main focal point of this engagement was the first ever Youth Congress on Statelessness, which we held in Brussels in July 2016. And we invited a group of 35 pre-selected young delegates who were paired up with ENS members at country level and worked together to develop national level advocacy plans. And we developed these in Albania, Macedonia, Slovenia, Serbia, Poland, France, and Italy. And all these plans identified and implemented activities to try and achieve progress towards the main Stateless Kids campaign objective to improve nationality laws. So, I mean, the activities varied in different countries, but to give you some examples, this included collection and presentation of short stories illustrating the problem faced by stateless children. Secondly, preparation of short briefing and materials to support advocacy. Thirdly, production of multimedia pieces, videos, card games, postcard campaigns, and the like. Fourthly, organising national stakeholder roundtable events. Fifthly, some work with the media, and sixthly, also work with schools in terms of outreach to sensitise children to the issue. And then the fourth component of the campaign was the regional advocacy. So, we, following the Youth Congress, we organised an event in the European Parliament, which was actually surprisingly attended by over 80 MEPs and their staffers, as well as Brussels-based NGOs, youth ambassadors and ENS members. And the meeting was hosted by Anna Maria Kratzer-Bildt, an MEP who was co-chair of the European Parliament Intergroup on Children's Rights. We also subsequently organised an event in the European Parliament in Strasbourg, where we handed over the petition to the European Parliament's Petition Committee, but also a representative from the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe to try and integrate the recommendations into both those parliamentary bodies. And we, for example, we were really encouraged when subsequently the Council of Europe adopted an action on ensuring every child's right to nationality in an action plan on refugee and migrant children. So that was one example of a campaign output. Another was that the European Parliament's Libe Committee agreed to hold its first ever hearing on statelessness in the summer of 2017. But I'll leave it there. But I suppose the analogy would be that if there are particular issues of concern in several countries in this region or other regions, then a campaign like this is one way to go about trying to tackle that. So to wrap up then, I think I have 2 minutes left. The final question I was asked is, what advice would I give on establishing a regional network on statelessness? And I guess the slightly flippant answer would be patience, persistence, and determination. But there are maybe 3 things in particular I would highlight. Firstly, the value of adopting a sort of incremental development approach. So starting with a light structure without too much formality, but equally recognizing at what point you need to become more formalized to incorporate, or where other step changes and development are needed so things don't stagnate. Second thing I would emphasize is that for me, the added value of regional networks is the multiplier effect they can achieve in many countries where there are members. So I think it's really important to invest in building the capacity of members to work on the issue. And secondly, I think the added value of a regional network is obviously as an interlocutor at regional level before regional bodies, in our case, the EU and the Council of Europe. So investing in building your relationship with regional stakeholders, finding champion MEPs or other representatives from regional bodies is clearly really important. But I think there's many success stories in Africa more broadly where exactly that approach has been done hugely well. And then the third I guess thing I would say is the importance of an effective communication strategy. I mean, we all know how busy our email inboxes are nowadays. So often it's as much how you say something as what you say. And for example, this is one of the reasons why one of the first posts I recruited to my team when we were able to was a head of communications, because I think communications is key. I will leave it there because my time is up, but happy to take any questions and very interested to hear from Ibrahim as the discussant. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chris, for such an informative and insightful presentation. We had one question because I know we are in about 11 minutes to the top of the hour, that is 1 p.m. EAT. Two of our speakers will be dropping off to other meetings as well, and one of them is Chris, and also the other is Dr. Mumby. So we had one question here, two questions, which have since been responded to by Dr. Mumby. I don't know whether you want to respond that to the same quickly as also you wrap up, because you only have about 5 minutes to leave before we invite the discussant.
If you allow, before Branwen respond to the question, I wanted to ask her one question, because her presentation was great. There is just one aspect that was missing in the presentation, is the treaties that the different countries have signed up. Are they influencing their policy? Are they playing a role in mitigating the stateless problem in the region? That's one of the questions I wanted to ask her.
Thank you so much, Ibrahima. You could respond to that, please, Dr. Mumby.
Thank you, I will. And thank you for the question also from Susanna Gakuru. The colonial borders of Africa and the colonial heritage of Africa creates very particular problems for Africa, and they're well recognized. And I think, there's a need to kind of sort that out. But I do think it's a mistake to think that Europe is somehow like every country is neatly drawn and it's perfectly clear who's inside each country. I mean, if we look at, the war in Ukraine is in some sense a fight about who is Ukrainian and who is Russian. I mean, these are not, the problems are essentially the same everywhere in the world that you go. There are a lot of commonalities. So that question of, what are the borders? They're always being created by war and conquest. That's just history. The United Nations is an attempt to try and end that. Not terribly successful, but there was an effort to try and say, okay, enough with this. So the problems exist in Europe as well. I mean, we have, for example, the Roma community spread across many different countries, and not all of them are stateless, but they are always at heightened risk of statelessness because every country says, no, you're from the other country. In that sense, I think they're a bit like the Fulani in West Africa, where Guinea says, no, you're from Cote d'Ivoire says you're from Guinea, and it's like, okay, for those who are got documents and are sorted out, they may face other types of discrimination, but they won't be stateless. But for the poorest and most marginalized, they'll be stateless. So the problems are not, and in Asia it's the same. Latin America, there are some differences as well. Although Latin America has less statelessness because Latin America has strong rights based on birth in the territory in most countries, not all. And so, Ibrahima's question, which also relates to Gatura's second question, what is the influence of the African human rights treaties and indeed international human rights treaties in resolving these questions in African states? Well, international law is not, it's not as if a treaty is adopted and magically it has an effect. But I think we can see certainly in Kenya the impact of there are a couple of important decisions by the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child and by the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, about this the situation of the Nubians. And I think, although it's not the case that the Kenyan government has said, oh, that's fine, we'll just implement their recommendations, just like that. But civil society, Felix Lore amongst the Kenya Human Rights Commission, other groups as well have really mobilized. Nemati has done really important work, the Nubian Rights Forum have mobilized around those judgments, and really, I think they have had an impact in practice. Tanzania has seen a couple of cases before the African Court on Human and People's Rights, and has, as a consequence, withdrawn its statement that people can access the court directly. And I don't think that they have had an effect in Tanzania. Tanzania has just said, we're not accepting this ruling, particularly the case of Anudo Ocheng Onudo, who believed himself to be Tanzanian and had his passport confiscated. And the court said, if you had a passport, it is for the Tanzanian government to prove that it was incorrectly attributed, and you must have due process protections. This was an arbitrary deprivation of nationality. Tanzanian government has not accepted this, but I live in hope that the decision may yet have an influence in Tanzania as time goes forward, and as civil society, so far as it is possible, is able to mobilize around that. So I think these international treaties, they can have an influence, but it requires civil society to mobilize. And of course, it requires civil society to have the space to be able to mobilize. So very important in Kenya, of course, has been the 2010 constitution that has provided the space for further, and the opening up of the greater access to democratization. Members of the Kenyan parliament have been able to speak on the issues. I think it's always a multifaceted campaign but I think you can see the influence of those judgments and treaties in Kenya, although never directly. It always requires a broader mobilization.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mumby. And once again, I want to say thank you for making time to join us this morning, your time. Yeah, and I just want to wish you a good day, because I know it is 10 a.m. your time. So thank you so much, and we look forward to interacting in the future. Bye-bye. Okay, so we will move on with our program. And so I am introducing the discussant on this issue of the regional and international best practices on eradication of statelessness and network building. I have interacted with Ibrahima, and to me, he's a veteran in this space. I remember the few times we interacted, I told him I would want you to support us so that we are the next Ibrahimas. And he works at the Open Society Initiative for West Africa, that is OSIWA, where he heads the Africa Union Advocacy Program of the Africa region. He is a lawyer in Senegal and France. Prior to joining the Open Society Initiative for Eastern Africa in 2007, he was a senior lawyer in charge of the African program at Interrights for 10 years. So he will be giving us insights, some takeaways from the discussion by Chris, and also just sharing with us his experiences over the years on this topic of statelessness and nationality. So on the NUA, Ibrahima Khan, I don't know whether I pronounced that correctly. Welcome.
Thank you, Annette. You correctly pronounced my name, and that's pronounce it even like a Senegalese. So that's a very good thing. I'm really mindful of the time and mindful of Chris, a difficult day in terms of activities. And I would like to go to the heart of the conversation. Chris outlined the work that is done in Europe to really try to deal with this issue of statelessness. In our continent, statelessness, the first actor that plays an important role on anything related to statelessness is the state. It's because the state is in charge of the legislation that organizes how you get nationalities. It's the state that creates situations that force people to lose their nationalities. And it's also the state that can help to create an environment that will really help to sort out all the nationality, all the problems that people are facing to deal with the problem. So state is at the heart of any struggle, any work that we are doing on nationality. That's one thing. The second one, which is people believe that it's obvious, but it's not. When you look at, with the little experience that I have, is to put a face on statelessness. We all talk about statelessness. We all think to understand what statelessness means. But you will change your position about statelessness when you see a stateless person. When you know what stateless mean in practice means. And that's why I like the approach of the UNHCR about statelessness is not a problem of law, it's also a problem of fact. Because sometimes when you see the people who having no problem to access nationality, then you realize that this is a very, very serious matter. So that's why usually when people undertake initiative action about statelessness on the continent, they really try to bring those who really are the face of statelessness. A woman who was going to give birth at the hospital, but she can't get any document for her children because herself doesn't have a document. A girl who was found in a country, taken to another country, and then left by her supposed parents alone, and facing all sorts of problems. Many situations that the continent is facing. So that's why in some of the regions in Africa, with the support of the UNHCR, because I also believe that any work around eradicating statelessness needs also the support of the UNHCR. Since 1996, the UNHCR was given a clear mandate by the UN General Assembly to really conduct a 10 years action to really help eradicating statelessness. We still have 3 years left, and we do hope that during those 3 years, Africa will be at the forefront in trying to eradicate this problem, because on our continent also, we even don't know who is stateless person and who is not. That is another big struggle. And what I would like to share here today is 2 or 3 experiences. The first is the experience of West African states, and showing that this action by states cannot be also an action by only one state. It's an action by a group of states. In 2015, the 15 ECOWAS member states met in Abidjan to have a conversation on statelessness in West Africa. Abidjan was not chosen by accident, because Abidjan is the capital city of Côte d'Ivoire, and Côte d'Ivoire nearly collapsed between 2000 and 2011-12, simply because in the country there was a new concept that was created, which is the concept of ivoirity. Ivoirity meaning you are Ivorian, a typical Ivorian, to exclude the others that are not seen as Ivorian. And everything was done to denationalize people who, during the colonial period, came to a country that was not Ivorian, Côte d'Ivoire, because it belonged to a region that was called West African Francophone States, AOF, Afrique Occidentale Française. So when in 1960 Côte d'Ivoire was created, it was a country where you had people coming from Mali, coming from, at that time it was not even Burkina Faso, the country was called Haute-Volta, people coming from Niger, trying to find a job because it was a very successful country in terms of economy. So the president gave everybody nationality. But then the political situation started. One person, Alassane Ouattara, who wanted to be a president, but who previously had another nationality, that nationality was used against him, and it created a lot of problems. And, you know, I can talk of many, many other situations. And the 15 countries came together and said, no, we can't continue to accept this. We need to find a way of working with UNHCR to really set up system, mechanism, procedure that will allow us to really tackle the statelessness problem, because we can't continue to live in that. They adopted what we call the Abidjan Declaration, and the Abidjan Declaration was really clear about what to do and said we need to eradicate statelessness in West Africa by 2026, you know, which was in the framework that was given by the UNHCR to do the job. UNHCR accepted to collaborate with the states, and the current Secretary General of the United Nations, Guterres, was at that time the head of the UNHCR. He came to Abidjan, made a very useful speech, and in addition to a declaration, member states accepted to adopt a plan of action. 5 years plan of action, revised, and after the 5 years, we'll see what is not working and to continue to do the work until the adoption, the eradication. In that plan of action, states decided that in each country, they will set up a focal point on statelessness. And the idea of the focal point on statelessness is to really try to help people to understand who could be stateless, who could not be stateless, and how to deal with the statelessness problem in the countries. So those focal points were really useful in terms of looking at the legislation, looking at the practices of the state, and trying to really come up with a solution to some of those problems. And every year in December, since 2015, the UNHCR will gather all the 15 focal points in a country to discuss in collaboration with civil society organizations, with other actors, to discuss the progress made by states in terms of eradication of statelessness. That itself helped a lot, because during those meetings, 3 to 4 days, people were exchanging experiences, were exchanging good practices, but were also talking about issues to avoid, to continue to make people stateless in their own countries. You know, that's where, for instance, action were taken about registration of birth, because most of the problem, the biggest problem in our regions, in our region, Africa, is registration of birth. It's not done, you know, I can tell you the rate, but it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And if I take your region, do you know that in Tanzania, the rate is about 14 to 15% of births are registered every year? That many of the things that are happening in Tanzania, if you, for example, want to get a passport, you need an affidavit, because many of the people don't have birth certificate. So those meetings help to sort out those issues and to really help in the, you know, states supporting each other to find solutions to their problems. That was one thing. The UNHCR was also very instrumental in trying to really coordinate or bring together other actors that could really help in this process. The journalists, because the whole informing the population, trying to help the population to understand what stateless is and how to deal with statelessness required an important role of media, the media in our region. And we are in the context where the media is exploding. You know, take your region, for instance, in Kenya, you don't even know the number of television, the number of radios, of newspapers, and everything. That is also something that is really very important. Academics, you know, we talk about statelessness, we talk about legislation. The academics are also very important in deconstructing, reconstructing, helping states to really put in place legislation practices that are in line not only with the constitution, but also with the legal obligation. So that was also done. And civil society organization, even parliaments were really called to really look at also this situation. I'm saying this because yesterday at the parliament in Senegal, finally, and this is within the framework of the Banjul Plan of Action, finally the Senegalese parliament adopted a legislation to end statelessness in Senegal. And it was done unanimously because many of the members of the parliament, through the processes that I described, have known what statelessness means and have decided to do something about it. And what I'm saying is in West Africa has also been duplicated somehow in the Great Lake region, where many of the states that Branwen were mentioning are also part of. So, and now in the Great Lake region, they have focal points. In the Great Lake region, they try to organize meetings for journalists, for academics, for other actors to really play an important role in collaboration with civil society. Because at the end of the day, civil society is also also plays an important role in this process. And you know, when we were talking this morning at the beginning, we mentioned the decentralization, the counties in Kenya, for instance. This decentralized institution also play an important role. Their participation in the process, because they are the one in touch with the local, the stateless person. So they can play an important role. So, I personally believe that a successful strategy of eradication, for the eradication of statelessness, require a coordinated effort, coordinated action. It's not just an action from one party to another, it's a coordinated action. And I do believe that the coordination go up to the journalists, up to the academics, up, you know, not only civil society organizations that we know, not only those traditional, because it's for us to really try to explain to people what statelessness means. It means that you are, you know, physically you exist, but legally you don't exist anywhere. You know, and it's through that process that finally also people in West Africa started working very closely with the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. There are even networks on statelessness in West Africa at the moment, and civil society participate in identifying stateless persons. I can tell you that almost in all the 15 countries now, the statistic institutions are so well educated on the issue that they have decided that every time there is a census, there will be in the census information on people who are stateless in the country, because it will be part of the census also. That's an important aspect of the law, because if state institutions start collecting those information, then we compel the state to do something about it. They will compel the state to really start acting, because you know, stateless is not just an individual problem, but it's also a problem for the state, particularly at this time where we have terrorism, we have many other problems that we are facing, and state needs to know who lives in its territory or not. So you see that from one a small aspect, you know, statelessness can go to spread to every other aspect of the life. And that's why I think for us civil society organization, we need to be very strategic. We need to be, more open to work with any other thing. And the state, we cannot avoid the state. And usually I will end with that, Annette. Usually we believe that the state is a monster. Yes, it could be a monster, but the state is run by individuals like you and me, by people who have hurt, who understand situation, who understand problem. And it's our role as civil society organization to be also proactive, to be also, to start developing initiative aiming at also helping them to understand the situation. And when they understand the situation, part of the problem is already sorted out. So, and that's why I believe that, this kind of meeting is really important in the sense that we will share experiences, we will share practices, but we will also put fingers on where action is needed, where the work is needed, because I think if state is not convinced that statelessness exists, in the next century, we will continue to do the same job without success, because they are the ones who have the tool to transform everything, and they can do it as the Kenyan example has shown. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share the little experience that I have in West Africa and other places working in this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ibrahima. Such powerful insights. And I think the takeaway for me is that eradication of statelessness requires coordinated approach or action, and also the important role that the government plays in all this situation, and that the civil society require a strategic approach in the eradication of statelessness. And I think listening to you, I can connect this to the Tanzanian experience. We only have only one NGO there that is working on the issue of statelessness. And it also takes me back to the question I asked. For me, that was a teaser to all of us as civil society organizations that work on matters statelessness and nationality. How many are we in the EAC region? Do we know the number? I know we know a few of us that work closely, but do we know that number? Yeah. So I will quickly go to the Q&A, and I know the chat box is very active. I've seen Benedicte has been trying to respond to some of Ibrahima's questions and concerns. I would just give her 2 minutes to speak to the same. There was also here a question on the by Wanja Munaita on the nationwide survey taking place in Rwanda. And she asks if the survey being conducted on specific communities, is it being conducted on specific communities or populations known to be stateless or at risk of it? And how generally this is being rolled out. So this will be answered by Josiane. Yeah, I'll first invite Benedicte and then followed by Josiane. And also request participants, if you have questions, you can raise your hand or write the same in the Q&A section to any of our panelists. Thank you. Welcome, Benedicte.
Hello, Annette?
Yes.
Benedict, over to you.
Yes, Josiane, but I will let you respond very quickly on that. Maybe just to introduce a bit the initiative in Rwanda that is for sure mainly and firstly by the National Statelessness Task Force, led by the government Statelessness Focal Point, with support of a number of state departments pertaining to that task force. So for now, as Josiane mentioned, there has been a training session targeting local authority, sector, and district in terms of training them on statelessness, training them on the approach of the survey before the survey is effectively launched, to identify not only stateless person per se, but also a wider category, I would say, which we often refer as person at risk of statelessness, or in some other languages we may use, but it's not always so appropriate, is a person with undetermined nationality. So the survey will be large in the scope, because, and that's probably what is quite innovative, and we look forward to seeing into practice. It's once identification has been made, then whether it's a stateless person or is a person at risk of statelessness, then there would be solution pathway that will be proposed to those persons, either to grant them the statelessness nationality if they don't have any other nationality, or if not, to confirm their nationality through a sort of a paralegal support for them to access to the necessary documentation. So I hope it's responding to the questions of Wanja, but Josiane, feel free to intervene. Sorry, over for my side.
Thank you, Josiane.
Thank you. I think actually Benedict has responded to more details about the survey and also where it's leading us. But as she said, because the target populations, the populations of interest are not isolated. They cannot be determined in terms of determining a group, but they have different profiles and they are together with the rest of the community. So that's why the survey is designed to actually be generally open and then actually lead to understand more of the specifics to be considered as it goes forward. So it's really nationwide, and with the support, as Benedict said, with support of the local government authorities. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you so much. I think we are done with the questions, and I also believe the same has been responded to effectively. And so I would want to hand us over to Robert Waweru, our lead person here at KHRC on matters citizenship and statelessness, who will be giving us closing remarks and also the way forward. Welcome, Robert.
Okay, thank you very much, Annette, and thank you very much everybody who has was able to join this webinar. This webinar has been very informative. We have been able to get perspectives from very wide, from people from all angles, and we are very, very thankful to all the participants and all the panelists and discussants who are able to join. I can see the time now is about 8 minutes to 13:30 when we were supposed to have finished the webinar. So I wouldn't want to take much of your time. I just want to say that we have really learned a lot from the webinar, and we would use the information that we have gotten from this webinar for two purposes. First of all, as it had been mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, is that we are working on a report, or rather a study on the status of statelessness in the EAC, in the 6 countries of the EAC, and this study is going to help us with our work, with our advocacy work going forward. We know we have achieved some successes in some countries like Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda, and some countries are still sort of lagging behind. We wanted to know where we are, and it was good to touch base so that now we can know how we move forward. And then secondly, we also in the process, as Benedict said, of coming up with a network on a regional network of civil society organizations that are working on statelessness. And that's why we had Chris Nash from the European Network on Statelessness to sort of share with us ideas on how to set up this network and how to run the network, because Chris's network is a big network of about 170 CSOs from about, he said, I think 41 countries, and they have really done some great work in Europe, and we want to also see how we can replicate that here in East Africa, so that we create the synergy and and the networks that are necessary for for eradication of statelessness. As one of the things that clearly came out is that eradication of statelessness cannot be achieved by us working as individuals or in silos. We need to work together. So without saying much, I want to thank all the panelists who were there. I would start with Dr. Branwen Mumby, in as much as she has already left. Thank you very much for your insights on the legal aspects of statelessness and the gaps that still persist. I'd want also to thank Benedict for being here all this time, and also on your insights, also on the legal aspects also, and what we need to do to address some of the issues and on statelessness, and also for leading this campaign to sort of create this network on statelessness. And I am sure we will meet. We have plans planned in the near future, and I know we are going to be meeting more often and having these discussions more often. I also want to thank Chris Nash for taking part in the webinar and also sharing with us the experiences from Europe. I want to thank Ibrahima Khan for coming and for being for waiting patiently until your time came. We want to thank you very much for your insights and experiences from West Africa, and also from the regional aspect of it. Ibrahima is big in issues of regional advocacy at the AU. Thank you very much for coming. I want to thank Felix. Felix is a good friend. We work together with the Haki Center. For your insights on the role of civil society organizations and the role of communities. As Felix rightly indicated, that the progress that we have made here in Kenya in terms of eradication of statelessness would not have been possible without the active participation of not only civil society organizations, but also the communities themselves. I also want to thank Josiane from Rwanda for giving us your experiences in what is happening in Rwanda and what is currently what you're currently doing there in Rwanda. I think Rwanda is also one of the countries that is doing very well. They have very progressive laws to eradicate statelessness, and we are all looking forward to learning from the experiences the experiences of Rwanda, and also the survey that you are currently carrying out. I want to thank Jane Mary Ruhandwa from Tanzania. I think you have really shared with us very good insights on what is currently happening in Tanzania, and we are hoping that we are going to have more of these discussions so that we can see how we can expand the work there in Tanzania. As you say, the work there is just starting, and we are here to help and support where we can, so that we can achieve more success. I also want lastly to thank all the attendees who have patiently listened and shared with us their comments and also their questions. And I want to say thank you very much, and I hope to see you guys very soon. I'm sure this space, we are all in this space, and we are going to be meeting very often. And just to say thank you very much, and see you soon. Back to you, Annette.
Thank you. I really was hoping that you just adjourn because we are done here. From looking at the Q&A section again, yeah, it's just a thank you. So thank you so much to all who created time to join us for this webinar. And as my colleague Robert has indicated, this is just the beginning. We will soon be disseminating this report. And of course, in doing so, we will have to interact. We will be interacting with you again in the near future to just ensure that the report is also very rich before we print it and disseminate. So we will be looking forward to, again, having a discussion on this issue. Thank you.